Our next step is, once we're done looking through Adobe Bridge, is actually to process everything in Adobe Camera Raw. So we have a bunch of images, as you can see, and this is a little outdated, but we're going to go through these steps and you can follow along with the PDF. There's a little bit more information in here, so I'll try to go back and forth between the PDF and here. So we can pick an image, and this gentleman, and you can actually select multiple images. You're going to control click or right click, go to Open Adobe Camera Raw. And I haven't uploaded the new Camera Raw, so let's go with the new ACR, which is Adobe Camera Raw default. Let's try it out. I had just updated my Creative Cloud. Okay, get started. So this one will look a little different than the PDF, as I wrote it several years ago. But we have some files here, and when you're working with a raw file, you can hold the details so much more than working with a JPEG. And you may have gotten this information from your digital imagery lecture. So if it's a JPEG, it's flat, the pixels exist, you can't push it, especially if something's blown out. So, and if you've ever taken my film class, you know that I will say, you know, it's okay to overexpose your film because you have more latitude when you're overexposing film than underexposing it. When you're in digital, you actually want to underexpose a little bit because we can pull those details, because once something is blown out in those highlights, there's no data, but there's data in the shadows. So we'll talk about that and you'll kind of see it in action. But here's how it is. You know, we have some of our images thumbnails here. If you chose multiple, if you chose single, it's a little different. You can preview your image, you can zoom in, zoom out. You can rate here, which is sort of a new function. And we have, you know, you can crop in here. Generally, I don't like to crop my digital images. I focus on frame. But we'll talk about this. So we're going to talk about, okay, choice technology. So the first thing you want to do when you start processing is actually look at exposure. So if you're in the darkroom, you're exposing everything first. I like to take everything to black and white because color can lead you astray when you're talking exposure. It's really easy to understand exposure when you're working in black and white, which is why when you start photography, you want you to work in the black and white darkroom for many reasons, but that's one of the reasons. So there's this black and white button, and I'm just going to press it. It eliminates the color, and what I'm doing here is I can see my blacks, my shadows, my midtones, highlights, and white. So I can say I have almost no data over here in this image, and everything's kind of in the midtones, shadows, and blacks. I'm not getting that full range. Now I'm getting some highlights here from this neon sign, but as you can see, it's kind of muddy. Everything's kind of the same tone. So if I presented this as a black and white image in darkroom, it won't look as nice. So what I'm going to do is actually, I can take my exposure and just simply, this is sort of the averaging. So it's taking those midtones. It's doing nothing but pulling those midtones and everything to the right. If I go here, it pulls it to the left. What I say when you're first starting off is go extreme and pull back. And I also want to remain true to the image. So this was taken sort of at twilight. So it's going to be a little darker. And I'm not looking at the shadows or the highlights, it's sort of the average grays. So maybe his skin tone, his shirt maybe, the beard. And then I can kind of pull down. So then I'll go to my highlights. And if I pull my highlights up, I'm losing all of this detail. So I may actually pull my highlights down. And actually move my exposure up. And I'm pulling those highlights down. And let's look at the shadows. So we want some good contrast. I'm not even touching my contrast slider. And sometimes I'll touch my blacks and whites. Add a little to make it punchier. And yeah. Looks like press something. So I can get kind of a feel of what it was previously. In the right corner, it's over here now, it's the before and after, so I can just look my before and after, and this is just black and white. Now we want to be showing color. And you can kind of cycle through. But now I'm going to click this up here and just, oh, not auto. Some of the buttons are in different places, so I do apologize. It's thinking. So I hit this black and white again, and it takes it back to color. Now my colors are a little wonky. Now we'll talk more about white balance and color further in the semester, but we have our temperature slider, which is whether it's cool or warm. And we've got mixed lighting, so it's a little cool on his shirt, but we got the warmth of the bar lights, so this is going to be a little bit more difficult to color correct. The first thing is you have this eyedropper, and I want to find something that's neutral. His shirt isn't quite neutral, but this wall is neutral. This is sort of a not cheating, it's a tool to help. But pressing that says to this here, it's neutral, it's either a white or a gray, saying this is what it's looking for something that's neutral, that doesn't have any sort of color influence, and it's taking that and really pushing that color up. The next thing we're going to talk about is the texture, clarity, and dehaze. And really it's fun just to play with the sliders to understand what they do. So just take the texture up, and we kind of got this like HDR, like crispiness. Take it there. This looks like a soap opera. So just take that. I like using clarity a little bit. So if I take it over here, again, it's this crispy over sharpness, and it's this, again, soap opera. So I like just to take it just a little bit up to kind of take those edges and like crisp them up. And sharpening is sort of crisping up your edges. Dehaze, as you can see, just some wonky effects. I'm not a big fan. I'll just zero that out. There's vibrance and saturation, which I'm going to actually go back to this PDF because I pulled it from. Alright, so saturation is for removing color, not adding it. So if you want something to not have as much color, and vibrance really just kind of takes those dull colors and make them more vibrant. So if we're looking at vibrance, so those duller colors, there's a lot of bright colors. So it doesn't do much, but like it takes some colors, as you can see his shirt makes it more blue. If you remove it, it's got this weird wonky look. So I'm not going to play with vibrance too much here, but I have in the past. Saturation, I don't want to add color with saturation. You can see it gives this like cartoony, like very early Photoshop-y, almost like Instagram filtery, like when Instagram first came out, filter look. But if I want to kind of like pull some color out, I don't really like this sort of half color thing. It reads very, I know how to use, I'm learning Photoshop. So either just remove it all the way or don't. We're going to talk more about the adjustment curve, but this is sort of where you can play around with your exposure in a different way. So you can pull up your highlights here or down, or you can even play with the slider here. So it's a different way to work with them. Detail, which you can add sharpening. When you're adding clarity, it is sharpening. You can pull it up a bit. Noise reduction, I don't think it does that much, but you can pull up, play with these sliders. Color mixer, so where you can really play with specific colors. So if you really want your reds to actually read more magenta, then you can play around. But it's say, I really want these orangey kind of reds. So it takes those red tones and actually pulls them to different tonalities. And this is just the hue, which is the color. So, say, I want those oranges to be yellow. As you see, it's really playing with that neon sign. But this is where you can really play around. It's taking your existing colors, and this is really helpful if you're shooting raw, and pushing them and playing with them and doing all sorts of things with them. Saturation, so you can look at the saturation with specific colors. So if I want, my aquas, which I don't really have any, and you can really see what you don't have in your my blues, which is his outfit. I really want him to be blue. Now when you're pushing them so much, it kind of looks cartoony, like we painted this on. So you have to be really delicate with it and say, I actually want his outfit to be a little bit more muted so that the neon sign's popping out and he's popping. And I really want, to take some of the reds away. Now, if I take it all the way away, it messes with the skin tone. So that's with the saturation, luminance, so you can play around with that. Let's say you are like, I really need to push certain parts of my image out. So there is a brush tool, keyboard shortcut K, the adjustment brush. This is where you're going to do specific edits. So if I'm just going to brush here and lost my brush, I can play around with exposure, just that. The adjustment brush isn't super exact, but I can really kind of, my eye is fighting attention with this bar counter. So if I hold down the exposure a little bit, my eye is actually drawn to the brightest point, which is that neon sign, which maybe I'll kind of tamper that down a little. And when I'm done, I can just press done. And when you press done, it kind of goes to the beginning. So if you double click, it's going to open up Photoshop. but it actually saves all of our edits on the file, which is really cool. I'll go back to my adjustment brush. All right, so I can do another adjustment brush. Might press that plus sign. So we're creating a new adjustment. And I'm just gonna brush his face. And if your brush is too big, you can use the left and right brackets or that size slider to make it larger or smaller. But I'm just gonna brush up that expression. Okay, so once you're able to, and if it lets you, you should be able, well, it's thinking, to play with these sliders. It's thinking. But you should be able to adjust the sliders when it lets you. There we go. It wants to do something now. So you want to be real gentle with your edits because you don't want it to look too unnatural, but we can pull it up a bit. So let's say, I'm feeling good about this image. So what you're going to do is you're going to actually click open, not done. So it's going to open this up. And it's going to think about it for a second. But it's going to open it up in Adobe Photoshop. When you hit done, it just closes out of Camera Raw as you saw previously. So what we're going to do is just open it up in Adobe Photoshop. So once it opens in Adobe Photoshop, we're going to take it to the next step of this process. Before you go into the next video, edit a bunch of your photographs. Play around with the sliders. See what you can and can't do with it. So I'll see you once Photoshop opens in the next video.